This is the Scottish Club Rugby Podcast.
The Scottish Club Rugby Podcast.
With Stuart Cameron and Dale Clancy.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Scottish Club Rugby Podcast, and as usual I'm joined by Dale Clancy, but for this episode we've come on the road to Poynter Park in Kelso, which is the scene of the South of Scotland's inter-district home game against Glasgow and West on March the 30th. It's the first training session for the South squad tonight, so we've come along to observe what's going on there, talk a bit about the inter-district championship itself later in the show, but first let's recap on what happened last Saturday with the two Premiership playoff semi-finals taking place. Marr losing out at home to Curry by 27 points to 12, and Hawick beating Kelso 25-9. Dale, two games which drew the fans for sure, and great occasions.
Yeah, both really good occasions. You know, obviously first and foremost we can talk about the Hawick Kelso game, because it was jam-packed at Mansfield Park. It was a really good first half as well. You know, it almost looked like it could have been one of those cup ties that, you know, probably would have given you a nice long script there to talk about how much the playoffs have played into your side of the argument. But in the second half, Hawick proved too strong. And I just think in terms of, you know, I was so invested in that game and commentating at the weekend, because it just gripped everything that I like about club rugby, everything that, you know, I talk about week in, week out on this podcast. The things that I do love about club rugby were all there to show at the weekend, and in particular that game. And it's easy for me to talk about that game because I was there. But you know, what a great advert for Scottish Club Rugby when we've been talking about so many changes that are coming on the horizon. It was such a big Kelso crowd there as well, do you know, and that's the thing that's been missing for a long time, and that essentially is my argument for the playoffs. It gives that one-off occasion for that big game, and obviously that was Kelso's. Hawick's were always going to be favourites to go into the final, but that was Kelso's, you know, potentially big game of the season. Obviously they fell short in the day, but it's the same at Fullerton. Big crowd there from stuff I've seen, the match reports that I've read as well in terms of the game between them and Marr and Curry. But ultimately, that is the Cup Rugby game. You know, Curry have been beaten twice in the league so far this season against Marr, home and away, and then they go on the road after being beaten by them a couple of weeks ago, turn them over, and pretty convincingly so. They looked, you know, in terms of the scoreline, it looks pretty comfortable.
So it's a Hawick against Curry final, a repeat of last year's final, of course, but when it will take place remains to be seen, although May the 4th keeps coming up. That appears to be the favourite, but even so, that's 8 weeks away, and that's going to cause concerns. Yeah,
it will cause concerns. I think obviously we can talk about all the factors that come into play, which is resulted in the fact it's May the 4th, but ultimately it's a bit of a joke in terms of the fact that we've had two big semi-finals, right? And you know, you're probably talking, what, 3,500 spectators at them, plus all the eyes that have watched the coverage that you've done, plus everybody that's been reading all the reports in the news and the press. There's a lot of people watching club rugby. And then you lose that momentum because you're bringing in the cup competition, which already Hawick aren't playing this weekend because Glasgow Hawks have called off, so they get a buy into the next round. You know, and so like all these fixtures that are coming up over the hill, you could have potentially just got the league, keep the momentum, get the final done, and then bring in all the fixtures after, because you know the cup could run alongside district rugby, because why not? The clubs don't lose a lot of players, and it probably makes it a better playing field and a better competition overall. More surprises. That's what cup competitions are about. So you know, obviously the longevity, the kind of the length of period of time between, you know, the semi-finals and the final, it does leave a little bit of a kind of sour taste in the mouth after having two really great occasions. All of a sudden we've got to wait almost 2 months for the next one. So yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learnt going into next season in terms of what is going to happen, but the mapping out of that needs to be a lot better.
And to put that into perspective, you look at the Six Nations, and you could fit the whole of the Six Nations with a bit to spare into this gap that we've now got. Yeah,
I think the whole thing is the momentum in the product, and you know, obviously, as you say, like the period of time is lengthy, and you can obviously organise bigger tournaments in that period of time, and I think that as well. But there's the power there between two clubs, I think, to work with the governing body to make sure that they come up with a date which is a bit sooner. But wherever we are, I don't think there's going to be any movement on that date, unfortunately so, because it would have been great to have sooner. You know, in the next couple of weeks, if we were gearing up for a Hawick Curry final, it just gives you that bounce. But there's so much between now and then that, like, really it detracts from it, because you're thinking about sevens coming in. We've got inter-district, obviously, we've got the cup competition as well. There's so much rugby that's going to be played in that period of time, which say for example you've got 5, 6, 7,000 people who've been watching articles or product. There's more than that because of the press, but say you've got that many people watching that product over the last week. By the time you get to the final, their eyes are going to be elsewhere because they might like a bit of 7. So I think you're chopping the market up, and you'll be lucky. You'll be lucky to have a crowd like you did at Mansfield Park for the final. I think by that time of the year, it'll be, the weather will be great. It should be a nice open game of rugby and firm pitches. But yeah, it just takes the wind out the sails.
Well, also last week the Premiership finished with all clubs completing their 18 games. Hawks made it 3 in a row at luckless Jedforest, who ended their season with no wins and just 5 bonus points, 46-14. That one ended. So good to see Hawks get a bit of success, because they've been very unlucky, haven't they, with players and issues. And I think you mentioned it right at the start of the podcast a few weeks ago that Andy Hill's had his work cut out as head coach.
Yeah, they've lost a few players to the Super Series product, and then obviously every year they almost have to reinvent themselves, and that's the nature of their club. The way that they were kind of founded was to compete at the top level of Scottish rugby. That was the incentive, obviously, when they first amalgamated and became Glasgow Hawks, was to be at the top table of Scottish rugby. And I'll tell you what, they've done a great job to stay there for their short period of time. In terms of their history, it's maybe not as rich as Jedforests or Kelsos or whoever else they've played in the division this year, but they've had longevity at the top of the division, which is great to see. It's been a disappointing campaign for Jedforest, and it was one of those games that it was, let's just get it over the line, get done, and they can dust themselves down and concentrate on other things now, because obviously there's going to be a lot of change at Jed over the next few years, and I think it gives them a real opportunity to take stock and see what they want to do as a club, because do they want to be competing at the top and striving and trying to back it with finances and players and that strenuous task of trying to compete with everybody else, or will they naturally settle and find a level? I don't know what's going to come around the corner for Jed, but obviously there's going to be a big few years ahead for whoever's at that club.
Well, in National 1, Dundee 57, Biggar 22, GHA 33, Glasgow Accies 14, and Watsonians 57, GHK 19. Now, GHA finished second, but third place could still go to either Highland, Melrose or Glasgow Accies. GHK, of course, relegated. Yeah,
GHK relegated a couple of weeks ago, and obviously that's a big win for Watsonians as well, that to finish their season and unbeaten at home as well, which, you think for Watsonians, some of the results we've seen for them as well this season, you're surprised that they've went all season unbeaten at home. So, it's obviously a really positive end to the season for them to get that win, and they'll be looking to build next year. But it alludes to the table. The clubs that are in that division, that they all cut each other's throats essentially. Like Watsonians are unbeaten at home, obviously not as successful on the road, which means that they're in that little cluster of teams in the middle of the table. So, it's going to be an interesting division next year with Jedforest coming down and potentially the likes of Peebles, Falkirk or Last Wade going up. So, however the leagues are going to pan out, it's going to be a really competitive division again.
National League 2, Aberdeen Grammar relegated for the third straight season, which is obviously disappointing. They lost to Last Wade 40 points to 10, but Berwick needed just 2 points to be certain of escaping the drop, and they did that comfortably, running out 43-14 winners at home to Kirkcaldy, with Stirling County also making themselves totally safe with a win at Gordonians by 41 points to 24. Now, the interesting thing here is, of course, these end-of-season games can produce some very unusual results, with some clubs desperate for points and others done and dusted.
Yeah, and it is obviously last weekend's results with the big Berwick win, which we looked at before and thought that it was one of those games that Kirkcaldy have struggled away from home, put some good performances in at home in periods, but obviously it was a winnable game for Berwick, and obviously they've done a really good job of it and made they've put the destiny in their own hands, which has been the final nail in Aberdeen's coffin. And it's disappointing to see a big club like Grammar drop the divisions in consecutive years. It's mental to think that only a few years ago we were commentating on Aberdeen Grammar in the Premiership.
Yeah.
And I remember games at Philippock when they're playing Selkirk, who are now being in the cusp of the playoffs and still riding pretty high. Aberdeen Grammar are plummeting, and yeah, it's disappointing to see them. But again, I've said it before, and loads of other people say it as well. I'm picking up off the back what other people are pointing out, but there's a void there in Caledonia. The inter-district results from last season only paper over cracks that are evident in the north of Scotland is the fact that there's not a lot of really competitive clubs up there. Obviously Gordonians now, I think, are Gordonians and Highland, are the two highest teams in in National Rugby. So obviously Aberdeen Grammar have been flying the flag for many a year, for a couple of decades now. But yeah, now one of the kind of lower teams from Caledonia.
National League 3, Cartha Queen's Park pretty much saved themselves with a fine win against Howe of Fife, who could have gone into second place, in fact, if they'd got the win there. It was a high-scoring match, ended 54-35, while Hamilton were ahead against Dumfries, but lost 39-29 and are still without a win this season. Now, Cartha and Hamilton both meet on the 16th of March at Dumbreck, and that's a game Hamilton have to win with a bonus point and stop Cartha from getting any points, and then Hamilton will need to do the same again away at Orkney the week after, so their chances of survival, let's say, are not looking great.
Yeah, going into that weekend, I was thinking, how the Fife did they win that game? Because it's, Cartha haven't been great, and how Fife have run a lot of teams pretty close in the division so far this year. You think of those two most recent games, both at home as well at Duffus Park, because they played PL and they also played Orkney, and in both occasions just narrowly missing out on a win. And you think, like, they're at the level that if the bounce of the ball goes a better way or conditions play into their favour, they could have been in the promotion hunt. But yeah, Cartha Queen's Park picking up a really, really impressive victory, which helps ease the nerves for their club as well, because obviously now Hamilton have it all to do.
Preston Lodge already promoted, having played all their games now. In other matches, Allen Glens beat Orkney 48-22 and Hillhead Jordan Hill took the scalp of Boroughmuir 25-14. Meanwhile, in National 4 we had a bit of a shock because Garnock lost their long unbeaten record. Meanwhile, in National 4 we had a bit of a shock because Garnock...
He's struggling.
Try that again then. Number 3, here we go. Meanwhile, in National 4, we had a bit of a shock because Garnock lost their long unbeaten record by a single point, going down 26-25 at Strathmore, who stay unbeaten at home this season, so no Invincibles tag for Garnock this season. And they were, of course, the last club to be defeated from the 50, so all across a lot of shite. Going to do that again.
No, I thought it was alright, it's just in that last bit.
It'll do, yeah, okay. Meanwhile, in National 4, we had a bit of a shock as Garnock lost their long unbeaten record by a single point, going down 26-25 at Strathmore, who stay unbeaten at home. So no Invincibles tag for Garnock this season, and they were, of course, the last club to be defeated from the 50 across all the divisions.
Yeah, in terms of calendar games played, yes, they were, but they've fallen at the same hurdle, I believe, that Ayr did as well. So, obviously, that in that length of run, that's impressive. But it just shows you how difficult league campaigns are. It doesn't matter if you're head and shoulders above the rest. To get that consistency, to be unbeaten all season is impressive. There's not many clubs have done it, and that's why, because it's so difficult to do. But yeah, the curse of Stuart Cameron struck Garnock at the weekend, because obviously, they were represented on the podcast last weekend. And you thought, I think that was meant to be. They were going to go unbeaten, but unfortunately, you cursed Garnock and inflicted their first defeat.
I can only apologise. Well, Perthshire, of course, beat Greenock Wanderers 47-25, and another surprise was second place Whitecraigs losing 10-7 at bottom club Ross High in what would have been obviously a very emotional first home game for the club since the death of their captain a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's been a difficult campaign for Ross High, but it's great to see them have a positive. Obviously, it will have been an emotionally charged day. It's difficult when these things encounter you in life. It is really challenging as an individual to try and deal with it, and I think always the best place to deal with that is in a community, and rugby clubs are the best. I think they're the best clubs going. You learn a lot of lessons along the way, and you meet a lot of great people as well. So obviously the power of that kind of environment has obviously helped Ross High at the weekend and getting a real positive victory, because this might be something that'll help dig them out. It's going to be a monumental turnaround to have a good end to the season for them, the way that the opening half went. But that's a real big scalp against Whitecraigs, because they're a team which have kind of flirted with the leagues above over the last few years. So for Ross High, it's a good victory for them.
And it's a result which could yet save them from relegation, although obviously they'd need to post 5 bonus point victories in their remaining 5 games and hope that Dunfermline don't score any points in the remaining 2, which of course is a highly unlikely scenario. Perthshire and Murrayfield Wanderers already down, of course, and will be playing regional rugby next season.
Which is crazy in itself, isn't it? In terms of those two teams, I remember Perthshire years ago playing in Roundabout, I think it was Roundabout Division 2. Murrayfield Wanderers had been in the Premiership and down, and I was speaking to somebody, I can't remember who it was, but just speaking about before the semi-final, somebody from Selkirk speaking about the big names in the lower divisions, your Hillheads, your West of Scotland's, and now obviously Murrayfield Wanderers and Perthshire.
And of course, one game in National 4 this Saturday. It's happening at 12 o'clock noon. Dunfermline against Perthshire, so Ross High's fate could be out of their hands come 2 o'clock.
Yeah, obviously that's something that they'll be keeping an eye on, and always these different kick-off times as well can throw up some surprises, because you never know who's going to be following the national team as well. What will the squads look like? So obviously this could be the final kind of chapter in Ross High and National League Rugby this weekend.
So attention turns to round 1 of the Cup and League Cup this weekend. All the Borders teams have withdrawn to concentrate on the Border League, with the exception of holders Hawick, but there are also a few other notable absentees from the draw, but you have to be in it to win it.
Yeah, I think it's, again, just highlights some things that perhaps do need addressed in the club game, and they no doubt will be, because obviously there's going to be a lot of change. But I think from a Borders, like a look at the kind of Borders teams, is in terms of them pulling out and looking to back the Border League, I think it's a good move, because I think the Border League is something that is it's obviously very, very historic. It's something that kind of needs revitalised, and the games have been competitive as well. You know, obviously Hawick are in a rich vein of form anyway, so they're a canter at the top. They're still, like to Melrose undefeated as well. So those teams are doing their bit to help revitalise the Border League, but it is slightly disappointing to not see them in the cup competition. And I think that, the fact that they are even having the conversation to withdraw from it because of fixture congestion is... Yeah, it's a conversation that probably should be taken out of their hands. It should be something that they're not having. But then you look at what we chatted about 10 minutes ago in terms of the Premiership final and the days. It's fixture congestion, and the answer to that really needs to be found by somebody to make sure that we can fulfill a league campaign, we can concentrate on a cup campaign, and there's also the inclusion of these really historic regional competitions that have helped sustain our game for such a long period of time.
Well, only 4 matches being played on Saturday, as 2 games have already been cancelled, which we'll come to in a moment. But first, the game with a 12 o'clock kick-off between Edinburgh and Glasgow Hawks. And we can hear from Hawks head coach Andy Hill.
Good to obviously have last week's final league game just on the run-up to the Cup, so it means that we're still relatively match sharp. And it was obviously even better to come away with a win, so it meant that we're 3 on the bounce at the tail end of the league and hopefully build some momentum coming into the cup game. A fair few changes this week, just simply because we've got the Glasgow varsity march on the Friday night, which is going to impact our own selection with that, which is obviously frustrating, but it's just one of these things that we're going to have to deal with, and it's one of the challenges of obviously being at Hawks. And then that should see a few guys come into the squad. So Jamie Blair returns from injury. He'll come in and he'll start on the wing. Ryan Flett will come in after we kind of arrested him last week after a slight twinge in his calf. He'll come in at 13, with Finlay Callan having bruised his ribs against Jed last week. In the pack, that'll see Sione Halafihi return after kind of giving a bit of time out last week, and then hopefully come back and obviously had a big impact as he usually does. And then on Tuesday night, unfortunately Paul Clearing-Cross got injured at training, so we'll probably see that Aaron Burgess will come in to start at hooker there as well. Accies has obviously not been a place that we've had much joy most recently, but that's obviously something we're going to look to try and change this weekend coming. Early kick-off as well, which will make everything kind of quite challenging for, getting there in time and getting set up, and it'll be something different for the boys, but it'll be the same for Accies as well, so it'll be interesting to see who adapts best to that challenge.
Andy Hill, head coach of Glasgow Hawks, and Hawks coming off the back of 3 wins in a row, as we've just been hearing. That ended their league campaign in 8th position. They went above Selkirk in the league. But as Andy said there, Andy, something he's been used to all season, a much changed team.
Yeah, it's almost a bit of a raffle in terms of times in trying to get a squad selected and get that consistency. And that's something that always comes back to bite teams. If you can't get those partnerships, I genuinely look at Kelso's team sheet when I've been covering them and doing prep, and look at the games that they've played and the partnerships that are there. There's actually a programme in front of me which which was a Kelso Jed game all the way back in October, and it's the exact same backline and pretty much the same pack apart from Liam Tate's not in it. That consistency is really, really key in squads, and it's something that's not really befitted Glasgow Hawks this season. They've not been able to do that because of personnel coming in, coming out. Obviously, this weekend is going to be difficult as well with the varsity match. So, there's obviously those barriers for Glasgow Hawks. But you've got to look at it from Edinburgh Accies' point of view. Like, they were flirting with fourth place as well. They're definitely their two home games at the end of the season. That draw against Kelso and then the defeat against Selkirk were the two games that really just took them out of the equation. So they'll be looking at the cup competition as an opportunity to have a bit of a clean run at it. And I think it is a good opportunity for them. They can compete with the teams at the top of the table on any given day. It's just they probably don't have that strength and depth what the big clubs have. So they probably go into this game favourites with thinking about league position and also thinking about the barriers of this varsity match as well. So it's going to be an interesting game.
Biggar against Marr, I was looking forward to this one. It's cancelled. Biggar can't field a team, so Marr will get a bye through to the quarter-finals at home to either Watsonians or Highland. Also off, Glasgow Accies against Hawick, so that's 25% of the cup games gone already, and that's not a good look for the competition at all.
No, it's not. You don't need to paint it out. Anybody who's got a set of ears and a brain in between them can actually listen to that and just really lose a bit of interest in it. Because, I think, obviously the years gone by when you used to have that big cup competition, which I know we couldn't have now because of the gulf in class between the teams because rugby's advanced so much. When you think about that, like Biggar Marr would be an interesting game. The kind of a good time to play Marr. They're probably still hurting after that defeat against Curry. Biggar would probably up their level, but just not able to field a team, which is it's disappointing. But sometimes there's other factors that come into it as well. As do the players really want to commit to trying to play a team who could have potentially been Scottish champions? Biggar are not at that level just now. So some players will fancy it, some won't, and that's probably when sometimes these injuries do come on a little bit stronger at clubs when you go, I don't quite fancy that. I always remember when we were playing Melrose, there was always a couple of players who had hamstring injuries and calf strains and stuff, and then they were back to play Morgan Academy the next again week. So it's challenging to try and get the motivation in the players as well when they're already defeated. So sometimes I think the cup competition as it stands just now is just not fit for purpose.
Curry versus Ayr is an interesting one as well, with Ayr getting promoted but ending their season with 3 defeats. 2:00 kick-off for that one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Ayr finished their league campaign the complete opposite way. Then they competed in the first 15 games, obviously went undefeated and then lost kind of 3 in the bounce, to finish their campaign pretty poorly. But they've had a chance to kind of recharge everybody, get them all plugged in and try and shake off some of those injuries. And obviously there's players in there that we've mentioned before, like Bova and Stafford and McCluskey. They players with a lot of experience that Ayr can call upon in these big games. Like, they've been to cup finals, they've been in this environment. And I don't think they'll be fazed by playing Curry. I think this will be a real opportunity for them to put a marker down ahead of next season in terms of being... I think Ayr will come back like next year. I think they will be one of the big hitters. But it's an opportunity for them as a club to have a real swing at it. And I do genuinely think, how do Curry approach this next 8 weeks? I had this conversation with somebody from the Hawick camp. I think that both clubs will approach it completely differently. In terms of their commitments and what they're going to do, I do wonder whether Curry will be desperate to get their hands on that Premiership trophy, and I think that coming into this game, I think they'll go strong. I think they will be strong, but coming into this in the inter-district competition, I think you'll see a little bit of player management coming into it.
Well, Musselburgh are playing GHA and Watsonians taking on Highland, the other games. And as you mentioned earlier, Watsonians undefeated at home, so they'll definitely go into that one as favourites. Dundee and Heriots Blues have byes already into the quarter-finals.
Exactly. The worst thing is sitting here discussing the cup because I loved it. It was probably one of the first things that really grabbed me as a rugby fan.
And 22,000 went to the final back in those days. Nicky Walker, Hawick against the Hawks.
Yeah, I actually said that to Nicky when we kind of first met, because obviously we work together now, and I think he probably thought I was stalking him because I just remember him scoring that try underneath the posts, and it probably was one thing that actually made me want to try and become a rugby player of some sort. It inspires people, and this isn't inspiring people because they're fulfilling fixtures and coming up with a system to try and maintain a cup as opposed to backing it. Like, make the cup competition a real jewel in the crown, because at the moment with teams having back, like Hawick have now got a bye, as you say, Heriots have got a bye as well. Like, it's just it devalues it so much, and it's not. Is it anybody's fault? It is. Ultimately it's somebody's fault, but it's just because there's such a cram of fixtures and everybody's trying to keep everybody happy. But there's so much value in a cup competition when you get the occasion like that. Obviously, over the last few years, the kind of competition at Murrayfield has changed somewhat as well, and it does give some teams a chance in the spotlight that might not have. So, what you think of that is, it's in the eye of the kind of beholder in terms of what your opinion is of that. But when you used to have some of the big hitters playing in the Shield, Glasgow Hawks once won the Shield at Murrayfield under Peter Wright. They should have been in the cup competition but got knocked out early, fell into that, and they had to work hard to get through to the final. So, these teams before have been dropped down into the other competitions and add real value to it. But, it depends what people think the cup competition should look like. But I do think we do need a really strong cup competition with allocated time in our game to captivate and inspire young rugby players to continue in the country.
We'll turn into the League Cup, which is contested by the teams in the bottom three divisions of the National League. Cartha Queen's Park against Murrayfield Wanderers, that's Division 3 against Division 4. Dumfries against Berwick, Division 4 against Berwick in Division 2. And here are the thoughts of Berwick forwards coach Paul Pringle.
So last Saturday we welcomed Kirkcaldy down to Scremerston on what was a pretty wet and miserable day. This was the second of those 3 last home games that we have. We were targeting for wins in them all. Obviously, it was important as well just to follow up on that good win against Gordonians with another strong performance against Kirkcaldy. They travelled down. They had a pretty good squad. I know that they've called out they were missing a couple of players, but most teams probably are at this time of the season. The lads put in a really strong performance for me. Standout players again. We had Jordan Patterson really come to the fore in the forwards. It was good to get Ekor back in there as well, and then Liam Robson, Jordan Jackson, and Adrian Rosie was with 2 tries was really, on point. So it's just great that these guys are kind of hitting form just before we start the cup campaign, and it was also very satisfying just to get that other win. We've got one more home game against Lasswade in a few weeks' time, and we're really looking to hopefully to overtake Kirkcaldy and Stirling County and just, pull ourselves a little bit further up the league and just set our stall out for next season. So, moving on to Saturday, we've got Dumfries away in the Cup. Dumfries were in our league last season. I think they probably suffered a bit at the start of the season, it looks like, from the results, but they certainly their last half a dozen games, it shows they're on the right track. So, we're expecting a tough game there. In terms of squad selection for us, we're largely unchanged from last week. Liam Robson is unfortunately unavailable this week. We'll need to rejig things around there just to cover the scrum half. That's our first, second, third and fourth choice scrum halves all unavailable through injury or various other events. So we've been working on that this week, and really it's about just going, putting in a good performance, continuing to just to build that momentum from now through the end of the season. And the cups for us is always an occasion where you don't have those pressures that you have in the league. You can just kind of express yourself, and that's certainly what we're telling the guys, just to go out, enjoy the game, enjoy playing the rugby, playing the kind of brand that we want to play, and ultimately then the result looks after itself. So bit of a long trip, but one we're looking forward to, and hopefully we can get the right result.
Well, a long trek, but Berwick will certainly fancy their chances in this competition. Winners away at Megatland against Boroughmuir. That sounds quite tasty.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously they've had a good end to the season as well, and played really, really well. Picking up those victories at Scremerston and keeping their position safe in National 2. So, now the pressure's off. They can concentrate on a cup competition and something that, because of the league that they're in, they go into this competition as one of the big teams. So obviously this is a good opportunity for them to go away from home and play a team who's probably not had the best of season so far. So they'll obviously go here with, especially after the performances that they've put in recently, they'll go in here with a bit of a spring in their step.
Well, 8 matches will be going ahead in the National League Cup, which looks a little bit more like a competition than the other one. And how about this one then? This is an intriguing one. Garnock, obviously Division 4 against Kirkcaldy from Division 2.
Yeah, that'll be a really good game, actually. I was really impressed with the way that Kirkcaldy played when we covered them a few weeks ago. They're big and robust in the forwards. They've got some really good players in the back three as well. I just felt that sometimes, perhaps because of the conditions as well, they weren't able to get the ball into those areas. It was all counter-attacking rugby, and it was a real arm wrestle up front. So depending on what the weather's like, Kirkcaldy can be a really stuffy team. But also, because they're such a big, heavy, physical pack, if you can move them about, then there's opportunities out there, because they'll tire and they'll not be as influential. So, depending on how Garnock approach this could be a potential scalp for them. Obviously they'll be looking to address the things that went wrong for them in their defeat last weekend. But it's a really good, interesting game, and for me that's what the cup competition's about. It's not always about watching Hawick versus Curry all the time, or Marr versus Edinburgh Accies, and watching all these brilliant games at the top level. It's about these clubs that they get strong teams out week in, week out. They fulfil their fixtures, and they've got a rich heritage as well. You think of Kirkcaldy, like, in particular, but those two teams have got, that's a real interesting battle, because it's so difficult to predict, and that for me is what cup rugby is about. It's not. Yeah, it seems like more of a competition, which is it captivates things a little bit more.
Gordonians will play Strathmore. That's another Division 2 against Division 4. Hawick Fife against Hillhead Jordan Hill, both in Division 3. Orkney against Aberdeen. Now there's an intriguing one. Division 3 against Division 2, but soon to be joined in Division 3. Yeah,
that will be an interesting one as well. And obviously Orkney have been a great story this season so far, and been able to almost get promotion from their division up to the next one. They were almost ships in the night passing by, but they're not. They're going to be in the same division next season, and it's obviously an opportunity for Orkney to get another scout, to give another sucker punch to Aberdeen Grammar, who are plummeting like a stone. So I think Orkney will be licking their lips at that battle.
Because 3 years ago, Aberdeen were in the Premiership, Orkney regional.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's great. But then that's how quickly things can change in club rugby as well. You think about, I was having this conversation with my dad actually on the phone earlier on about, sometimes teams are really successful because they had a bit of money. Now, we were talking about Bigger at the time, because he was watching the highlights back and goes, "Oh, that Kelso number 6 is a bit of a menace." And I was like, Bruce McNeil goes, "I used to be at Bigger," and he was like, "Oh," and then because of the Peebles Bigger rivalry, gets on a bit about finances, and sometimes, Bigger are a good club, well-run club, but sometimes clubs get pummeled with money, and all of a sudden, when that ship sails, they're away. You think about the rise of perhaps St Boswell's for a while, and obviously when the money comes out of that club, unfortunately they fold, and sometimes that happens. But it's crazy to think that Orkney, who have to commit, I had to tip my hat to them. They commit so much to fulfilling their fixtures in National Rugby. What an ambitious club to want to play at that level, against a team, Aberdeen Grammar, who have been a huge club in the past in terms of being in the Premiership. And I'm thinking kind of in the early noughties and in that kind of era, they were one of the big teams in that division. And to think about them going closer towards playing regional rugby than back into the Premiership is a scary thought.
Stewartry will play Falkirk. That's going to be a tricky one for Stewartry. Division 4 against Falkirk, still going for promotion out of Division 2 into Division 1. So that's going to be tough for Stewartry, but I'm sure with the home advantage they'll certainly give it a crack. Stirling County against Hamilton. That's Division 2 against Division 3. We can actually hear from the head coach of Stirling, and that's Craig Deacons.
Obviously in the weekend there we found ourselves going up to Gordonians. We prepped really well during the week. We're a really strong team going up there. Boys are pretty confident going up. Good bus journey. We knew what the aim was to go up there. We just needed to pick up that win to secure us in National 2. Regardless of what happens with other teams and stuff, it was in our hands. So that was our aim. We went up there. We didn't really start off the game the very best, if I'm being honest. Turned over easy set piece ball. We gave away some silly penalties, and just they punished us, and we found ourselves behind the post a couple of times after conceding some really easy scores, to be fair, which was really disappointing. However, Gordonians were kind of guilty of giving quite a few penalties away. And Lewis Jameson, our number 10, managed to keep us in contention in the scoreline by kicking to goal. So we found ourselves at half-time 17-16 down. Made some changes at half-time, put subs on, had a bit of a chat obviously as well about what we wanted to do in the second half. Went out and we executed that. We ended up winning the game 41-22. Disappointing we scored at the very end of the game, let them get that score, or we could have kept a clean sheet in the second half. But the good thing for me, the boys were really positive when they came off. They were really happy with the result. It was one of them ones that we should have been putting these kind of performances in earlier on in the season. However, it's happened now. Good thing is we're safe in National 2. Still got one game to play against Falkirk in a couple of weeks' time as well. So obviously our attention turns to the cup now this weekend. We've been drawn against Hamilton at home. I know their head coach really well, Ben Addison, played with him for many a season at Stirling County. And the kind of player that Ben was and what he's trying to do over at Hamilton, I'm expecting they'll be coming out wanting to attack us this weekend. I know you look at the leagues, where they're sitting in National 3, it's maybe doesn't look the best. However, you look at National 2, the teams at the bottom, there's sometimes no difference between them and the teams that are mid-table and top of the table. So on their day, anyone can win, anyone can beat anyone. I'm certainly taking the approach this weekend that it's business as usual, keeping our players really grounded. It was a good win last weekend. We've got that confidence. We've got our tails up. Looking forward to this weekend. We've got to turn up and play against these guys, because if we turn up with the wrong mindset, the cup, especially these teams at the underdogs, it's like winner takes all for them. So they'll be probably coming to Stirling County this weekend, a point to prove. I know they've not maybe picked up any wins this season in the league. However, they'll be pushing for that for the cup game this weekend. But we're going out, really strong team. Get the opportunity to maybe look at a few other players that have featured earlier on in the season. We've had injuries and stuff, but we can give a few of these boys a bit more game time this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see how things go this weekend.
Craig Deacons, Stirling County's head coach. Two other games to talk about in the League Cup, which is West of Scotland against Allen Glens, both in the 3rd Division. And finally, White Craigs against Preston Lodge. There we have White Craigs, 2nd in Division 4 against the Division 3 champions Preston Lodge.
Yeah, a couple of interesting games. I think you probably look at that and wonder if Preston Lodge away from home against obviously White Craigs can continue that momentum from their league campaign, because White Craigs will obviously be smarting after the defeat against Ross High last weekend, and obviously they'll be wanting to put, kind of right a few wrongs and go out there and put in a performance. So it's Cup Rugby, it's a completely different game. All the clubs this weekend that are in Cup action, if they've been able to field a team, they'll have to approach the game completely differently to what they do in usual league action. So obviously some of the decisions made on the field will have a real impact in terms of who's going to progress into the hat for the next round.
Well, let's move away from the Cup competitions now and look at the upcoming Inter-District Championship, which runs across 3 Saturdays, starting on March the 23rd, ending on April the 6th. And we're all looking forward to this one. Yeah,
I loved it last year. I think what they've done to bring this back is been really successful. So we can sit and be critical about quite a lot of things in terms of where club rugby is just now. The conversation's going on, but credit where credit's due. The clubs wanted it back, and they worked hard to try and make it successful last year. I think, looking at it, and this isn't border bias, but looking at it, I think that the South of Scotland, the South team certainly last year led the way. I think with the standards that they put on and the way they approached the game, or the games that were ahead of them, the day at Braidholme was the finals day was a great occasion. I think obviously there was a very good crowd there. Potentially could have been a little bit more, but I like the idea of the round robin coming back. Again, it's something that you think back to those old cotton shirts and playing on those dark damp pitches back in the kind of the heyday of club rugby. It was such a big part of the rugby calendar, obviously before my time, but people still grasp it in the south of Scotland, certainly, and other areas as well. It was so important in building the foundations for a lot of successful rugby players, so it's got a slightly different guise in it now in terms of the players that are contributing towards that, but this is going to be a really competitive inter-district. I think, saying what I said at the start of that, The South led the way last year. I think everybody it's pretty level going into this competition.
Yes, we'll have a look at the squads in a minute, but it's really a great opportunity, isn't it, for club players in Scotland to take part at a higher level, represent their region, and for some this is going to be the pinnacle of their careers, is representing their district. And of course the Championship came back after a gap of many years last season. The format, as you said, was just a couple of games, but this time round each of the 4 regions will play each other. That's Glasgow and West, of course, the south of Scotland, Caledonia, Reds, who are the holders, and Edinburgh. And certainly looking at the squads as we have been sort of poring over, and funnily enough the Edinburgh squad looks about twice the size of all the others. I'm not sure why. Certainly it's great to see the inter-district back and all these positives.
Yeah, I think that obviously you look at the Edinburgh team, and obviously Edinburgh District are a big squad. They've obviously got probably about a dozen players more than what the other teams do, but you know there's a lot of factors in that as well. You know there could be a lot of those Curry players that might not, and this is I don't know, I've not heard anything. I'm just thinking that it does give the opportunity for a lot of those players perhaps to, if they don't want to participate in this, because obviously the players don't have to, you know, it does give them the opportunity to concentrate on things elsewhere, because this is going to be a critical time in the season for them. I do think my point earlier on was I think that the Hawick players, they'll not be of the same mindset, because I think if you're favourites and you're going into it and you're winning everything, you have to continue that to prove it. So I don't think you'll see many Hawick players retreat from that squad, but I think it does give Curry that opportunity, and that's not a negative. I think that's probably a positive for them, that they can actually say, do you know what, we think we're going to win, we need parity up front, so the likes of Ryan, Stuart, Thomas Jeffrey, we don't actually want them competing in this squad, so we're going to take them away, because there's plenty of other players that could fill the gaps. You know, you look at Edinburgh District, they've got players like Cal Davis in there, who not long ago was playing every single game for Watsonians in a semi-pro level, so they've got a lot of experience coming into that squad, a lot of really, really good players in there, in that, the squad as a whole. You know, obviously some borders as well, Robbie Chalmers is in there, so, you know, they're competitive squads. I think the Glasgow and West team looks really good as well. You know, players like Bickerstaff and Blair Jardine from Marr in there, and then Cairncross from Glasgow Hawks, and obviously the likes of Rohan Potty-Ferrer, who's been really, really impressive for them this season.
One of the big stars, isn't he?
Totally. You know, they've got a lot of players in there that have been standout for them this season, and to add to it, you've got a couple of Newton Stewart players. Mark McCormick is a really, really good number 8. So, you know, it does give that opportunity for the players at a lower level to step up, you know, and play in a better environment and represent their club as well. You know, they're going up, and a couple of Newton Stewart players are in that squad, and they'll be able to contribute towards that. And you know, they'll look at the Caledonia Reds team as well is slightly different. You know, you've got the likes of DJ Ennis in there, who does play for Curry, as does Jacob Ramsey, but you know, their original clubs hailed from the Caledonia region. So obviously, a lot of those players, are kind of dual registered in a loose way, because they've had to go play rugby elsewhere. But that comes back to a conversation earlier on. You know, there's not a lot of resource and appetite in the north of Scotland, so a lot of players go and seek opportunities elsewhere, and that's sometimes jobs, family, education or whatnot, but obviously it culminates in them playing rugby for other clubs.
Well, the fixtures are 23rd of March, Edinburgh against the South, Glasgow and West versus Caledonia. On the 30th of March, it's the South against Glasgow and West, and Edinburgh will be playing Caledonia Reds. And finally, on the 6th of April, Glasgow against Edinburgh and Cali Reds versus the South of Scotland. And a great example of a competition, very concise, 3 weeks, and it's done.
Yeah, I think so. I like it. You know, it gives that structure, it gives that continuity. It's difficult to predict as well. Like I'm not going to lie. Last year, when it was the South versus Cali Reds in the final, I don't think many people would have seen that result. Like, the South were littered with Hawick players that had been successful that campaign. Matty Douglas spent the whole season unbeaten until he got to that game. So, you know, obviously it can throw up some surprises, but the fact that it's got the league element of it now allows a little bit more interest and intrigue in it, and there could be a potential that a team could be afforded a defeat and still end up champions. And you know, that's what we want to see. We want to see a competitive game. We want to get to the third round of the fixtures and still not know who's going to pick up the trophy, and rely on the results to come in. I think it's going to be it's a great addition to the calendar. It's really, really good, and I think district rugby, representative rugby, teaches these young individuals a lot of things as well. Getting in a different camp, getting to know different people. You're broadening your your horizons and getting to know different individuals. So it's a big positive for me.
And I'll tell you what I do like about this one is
no playoffs.
No playoffs, absolutely. The fact that whoever comes on top is going to have to do it with points difference and wins, and that's great for me. Everyone's playing each other, and whoever finishes top, well, crown them champions.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think in the format some other competitions there's different ways that you enjoy it, but certainly for this, it's a 4-team league. It's going to be won in fine margins, and that could be in a game, or it might be top of the table, so points difference could come into it. Loads and loads of different ramifications, but it's an interesting league, and it's certainly great to see it back.
And I think the sense I'm getting is that all the regions are really buying into this. I'm not saying they didn't last time, but there seems to be that they've taken what happened last year and they've moved it on.
I totally agree, and I think rugby's changed a lot. You think about it would almost be good to see it be such a short window and really competitive and physical and challenging for all the clubs. Like, could you imagine like a Wednesday, Saturday, fixture and get it done quite quickly? But it would be too much pressure on the players who have got work commitments. It's a different game now, but yeah, I think that as soon as you started to see the teams come out on social media, they all came out around about the same time as well in terms of the social media profiles. So Edinburgh District came out, and then Glasgow in the West started getting a bit of traction. Cali Reds started to make a bit of noise again, and the South have obviously had their social media as well getting ramped up again, and you started to get that little bit of excitement, because it was a collaborative effort to make sure that they were all pulling in the same direction, which in Scottish rugby is a difficult thing to do. But certainly all the districts were kind of backing it, making sure that it was going to be successful, and then you started to see the teams coming through, and I was, I know last year we kind of picked the South starting lineups and stuff, and I think I was the most wrong out of everybody. But you look at the squad and you think, oh, it's a really strong squad. That's a competitive squad. And I started to see the other ones coming through, and I thought, geez, this is going to be a really competitive league, because even Cali, who are the reigning champions, remember, obviously they're going into this campaign with some really, really good players, especially when they go into this environment. The likes of Glenn Falls plays for Falkirk. Playing in a lesser division, you can say. I don't think that's too disrespectful, but he's playing in a lesser division, but he's a quality player, and you put him amongst other quality players, and you start to see the best in these individuals. So I think that's why regional rugby and district rugby is so hard to predict, because you don't know how these partnerships are going to work, and I do think it's going to come down to a little bit of that, those key partnerships in positions in the squad, that front row perhaps. The South will probably benefit of having a full Hawick front row almost. And then you look at other areas of the pitch as well, and they need to try and get those partnerships at scrum half and fly half, perhaps that centre partnership, and those combinations in the middle row and the back row. So how those over those 3 games the coaches approach it is going to be interesting, because as you say, they've all backed it this year, and all the squads are pretty stacked. Like, it looks pretty good.
Let's give you the venues for these matches, by the way. 23rd of March, Edinburgh against the South. That's being played at Stony Hill, Musselburgh. Glasgow and West against Caledonia. That's at Braidholme. The South game against Glasgow on 30th of March is down here at Kelso, Poynter Park. And Edinburgh against Cali Reds. That's being played at Rayburn Place. And then the finale on the 6th of April, Glasgow against Edinburgh at Braidholme. And also Cali Reds against South, which is in Inverness on the plastic pitch.
Yeah, obviously it's the fixtures are the fixtures. I don't think anybody's got a particular advantage. Looking at it from where I'm sitting, I think they're all going to be difficult. You need to win your home games. Simple as that. Make sure you win your home games and try and sneak a result on the road if you can. And it's definitely going to come down to that. So I can't wait. I genuinely can't wait. I think that when it's first arrived back, to be involved in any way, shape or form, to be discussing inter-district rugby is an absolute honour. So to see it in the shape it's in just now is great. And if they've started this way, and this is the kind of level of excitement and appetite they've got for it at this stage, I think going forward it's only going to grow.
Well, we're going to be live on Rugby Radio every weekend, covering games from Musselburgh, Kelso and Inverness, and Borders Rugby TV providing highlights on the Sundays too, so looking forward to that. How important, though, are these inter-district games now that the Super Series has been scrapped, or will be scrapped, bridging that gap between club and pro level? Well,
it depends what shape it takes, because the questions that we still need answered aren't there yet. but the gap is there. Like, as soon as you take out that semi-pro level, which was a very good level of rugby, because there was the structure of professional rugby, but the innovation and errors of amateur rugby. It was a great environment. The rugby I thought was exciting, really good product, really physical. All the teams had their different brand, so there's a gap there. So inter-district, it remains to be seen if it's going to plug a gap or take the part, because if they bring them back in and don't want to plug that gap and elevate the Premiership as such and to be in that level, then the Inter-District Championship is going to have a huge role to play in terms of that player development and putting these players in the spotlight in terms of getting picked up by the likes of Edinburgh and Glasgow, and perhaps even teams like Falcons. You know, you think about players that are on the border here. You know, there's the opportunity that you can be drafted into the academy, or they might actually pick out a gem and entice you down over the border. Because you think about players like Jay Linton have been training with Newcastle Falcons in the past, so you know, obviously Grant Shields played for them as well, a Kelso lad. So obviously there's that, but is that what rugby's going to look like? It's a hard one to answer, Stuart, because we don't have the answers as to what is the direction of travel. We've had a 443-page PowerPoint presentation with 600 possibilities. You know, and even that, you could dissect that all day long, and you probably still wouldn't even be able to find which is your favourite option. I couldn't. So, you know, in terms of how important Inter-District's going to be going forward, remains to be seen. The good thing is that it started off really well, and all that's going to really happen is you're probably going to be adding quality to it. You just hope that perhaps other forces don't get their claws into it and try and make it something it's not, because I think they've went back. It's almost a bit of a throwback in terms of going back into, you know, years ago when it was really, really successful. They've just pressed the reset button and went, let's just do the basics, do what it did before, what it says in the tin, 4 teams, let's play each other, and then you can be the best region in Scotland. It's as simple as that. So if you start making it something it's not, then it becomes really difficult. But I'll tell you what, like, I know your argument for this, but if you had inter-district rugby elevated on a platform that people could see it, I don't think it would impact gates at all. You'd still get people flocking at the grounds to see it. It's getting it up to the point where you do have a couple thousand watching it. You know, I think that's the level that they should be aiming at, because, you know, you've got a lot of clubs there represented, you've got a lot of people, a lot of families, a lot of, you know, it's a showcase, you know, and it's good rugby as well. So, you know, obviously I think the Inter-District has to aim high on its own accord, and what will happen in Scottish rugby will just take effect. You just hope that, the claws don't get in and rip it to shreds.
Because back in the old days, as you mentioned, those 4 districts, of course, it was North and Midlands, wasn't it, instead of Caledonia, but the rest were the same, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and obviously the south of Scotland. But you also had Anglo-Scots, and they played each other. It was always kind of December, January time, I think, in the winter months, but you would find games, instead of being frosted off, they would use the undersoil heating at Murrayfield, and so obviously games could be switched there quite easily in those times. But also there was a buy-in from counties elsewhere, in Ireland in particular, you know, and you had Ulster and Munster playing the regions, and there was an awful lot of quality rugby. But of course the other good thing was that the games were spread around the area as well. They weren't just in one place, and certainly in the borders that's a very important thing. Yeah,
and I just think that there is, it doesn't matter what the name has been, the idea is the same, and the regions are all competing against each other, and the rugby is quality, and I think that obviously going forward you're reliant on other factors, and I think that probably in the next couple of years, I think that Scottish rugby as a club game needs to see what it can do within its own remit and see within what it's got within its own powers. Inter-district works. If it's got this place in the calendar over 3 weeks, then brilliant. If you need to move this and shift it to accommodate a cup competition, then do it. But keep it as it is. There's nothing wrong with it. Cup competition needs fixed. Let's fix that. In terms of where this sits, it remains to be seen, because I think as a club game we need to probably look at it and fix ourselves first, and then look over the fence.
And there's another big plus as well, isn't it, that everyone is affiliated with their own clubs as well. That's the sort of thing that can happen. You can play for your district, but you also go back to your club, which is like what happened in the old days.
You can learn so much from what was successful, you know, back decades ago, but it's trying to put the modern slant on it. And I think in this current environment, I think that the Inter-District has probably nailed it. You know, they've been able to get the buy-in from coaches, volunteers and everybody to re-galvanise something that was completely dead and buried, for a long period of time. It's not been on the radar. I know the south of Scotland and the south have tried to, play some fixtures and obviously been successful in that and cross-border games, but everywhere else it was never on the radar. So, it's obviously in its current format, it's done really well to come back. And yeah, I think you can learn a lot from things that have happened in the past, but it's just great to see, like obviously say we're at Poinder now, there's players out there that have come through district rugby when they're younger. It's an environment that they're used to. A lot of these players have played with each other in some way, shape or form, and they love coming back into these camps and meeting up again. And yeah, rugby's a great environment for that. It's a great environment for being just chucked in. Let's have a go. But everybody's in it together. It's the same common cause. It's a club that's born from a lot of clubs. So obviously it's a good concept and something that hopefully it can flourish in the years to come.
Well, of course, we're still just a few days away now from a decision as to the future of club rugby in Scotland, so we haven't really got in depth today, but that's something that we'll certainly be returning to in a couple of weeks' time, without any question, as soon as we know what is happening, because there'll be a lot of fallout, there'll be a lot of positives, there'll be a lot of negatives as well. So we'll cover that in detail when we actually find out what is going on. It seems to me the vibe is towards bringing the Super 6 teams right back at the top.
My opinion, and you can switch off now if you don't want to listen to it, but my opinion is the fact that I think some clubs, remember clubs, okay, these community clubs have done a great job of embedding a franchise into it and branching out, and all of them had the same remit. So they knew they were getting a semi-pro team. They also had to still sustain a club team. Some have done better than others. If you parachute Boroughmuir in and they drop 2 divisions again, then what's the point in it? Why not just let them grow? Like if they're that community club and they want to develop players and develop a rugby club, give them the opportunity to do it from where they are. Like I don't think they're impeded at all. So let them develop from where they are. Don't just parachute them back in. I think it's counterproductive, really, if I'm being honest. So, for me, I would stick it as it is. Take away the Super 6 clubs and then just ask them and support them to fold back in. I read someone on Twitter. There was something about remember so and so bid for it and remember so and so bid for it, and it's like, well, brilliant, but they never got it. So those clubs that never got it have had to sustain their own club and still go on the same path they wanted to go on. These Super Series clubs have went on the path that they wanted to go on anyway. Like they bid for it, they were successful, they travelled the journey that they wanted to. It just happens that the end of the road is now. So there needs to be support to fold it back in the way. And I just think that to bring Stirling County and Boroughmuir back up is not the way forward. The dust will settle. Players will go and play rugby where they want to play. And I don't think there's that much attachment to the clubs nowadays that there used to be. So my opinion is keep it as it is. I think the 10-team leagues work. Like nobody's out of national rugby. Nobody's not got the opportunity to spend a couple of years getting back up towards the top. It's if anything, open up promotion and relegation a little bit more. Have 2 up, 2 down, and it might happen quicker. But I don't think parachute them in's the answer. I think it's a terrible suggestion to go, sorry, that never worked, and your club team have certainly been poor over the last few years. So what we'll do is we'll take you and pop you into the Premiership and aye, go figure. Go and try and suss it out yourself. I just think it's a reckless way to try and integrate those clubs back into the club game.
Of course, we spoke to David Ferguson, didn't we, on Saturday? He had the completely different opposite view, which is good because that's what you want. You want to hear both sides of the story, and I think his concern was health and safety as well. If you're going to have big players playing in National 3, etc., who have been playing at the Super 6 level. But of course, the clubs themselves, like Boroughmuir and Stirling, if they are going to stay in National 2, National 3, they're not going to really attract Boroughmuir Bears or Stirling Wolves players. So from the club's point of view, which they will obviously look at, they can potentially lose a lot of their best players.
So in terms of that, and I get David's argument for it. Realistically, if you're folding them directly back into the club teams, yes, there is a health and safety element, but nowadays players are ambitious that they want to play at different levels. Now, are you trying to say to me that players like Ben Afshar, who's just signed for Glasgow, is going to play back for Stirling County? Well, he's not. Craig Jackson, Ross McKnight, and Glenn Bryce and Ryan Southern, they're players that have played at different clubs. Like, there's no attachment there to Stirling because they went and played either professional rugby, played in America, played for Watsonians. These played for Curry, for example. Ryan Southern's from Curry. So, these players have played elsewhere. Tamasitas is lined up in the front row for Stirling. He played for Gala. He went and played rugby elsewhere. I just think that these players that are coming through will find their club. They will go and play at the level they want to play, and that's for the clubs at the top of the game to support that and integrate them in. So, the big thing is about getting youngsters playing more rugby, getting people playing more rugby with more clubs in the Premiership, and just allowing players to naturally find their place. The clubs who do a good job of it will grow and flourish. The ones that don't do a good job of it, they'll start to fall down the pyramid. And I just think naturally you need to let that settle. So with that argument, I don't buy it. I don't buy that there's a health and safety element. There might be if you get one powerhouse, but are you trying to say that, like, the back row for Kirkcaldy that played Peebles the other weekend, they could play in the Premiership for 20-30 minutes, which some squads can do. Huge men. So you're trying to say at National 2 level there's a health and safety element? I don't. Matty Carrier was the Premiership winning captain for Hawick last season, now playing in National 2. So what's the difference? They're players that have been playing at the top of club rugby coming down the pyramid. It's not an argument that I really buy, because these players nowadays go and find their level of club. Melrose done it for years. Fraser Thompson's a Gala guy, but Gala were never at the top of the pyramid at the time, so went and found great opportunities at Melrose. And he's affiliated with Melrose now. I just think Fraser Thompson, Melrose, playing district rugby with him, he was always a Gala guy, but he got so many opportunities for Glasgow Warriors, for Scotland Sevens, because he went and naturally found his club. And that's what the club game's about now. At the top of the pyramid, people will go and find their club, and then below that it's community rugby. The finances come into it as well, but in time, I just think that we'll look back in 5 years' time. If it went the way that I want it, we'll look back in 5 years' time and say, do you know what, it probably wouldn't be a great idea to put Boroughmuir Bears back in there. I don't know too much about the club politics and how it works in there, but they've got the tie into the school, and they've got an opportunity to then grow and nurture these young players through, and you probably get more benefit for the Scottish club game as well. People need to get their opinions out there, and I've said it before, I'm happy to back anything that happens in club rugby. I absolutely love the club rugby game, so I'm happy to back anything that happens, but it just needs to be the right decision, and it needs to work, and it needs to get the buy-in of everybody. Now, some people will take more convincing than others, and I might be one of them, but ultimately I'm still going to back it. I want to see the club rugby game be really successful over the next few years. So, I know in the next few weeks we'll talk about it a bit more, but my stance might not change in the next fortnight.
Yes, like mine on the playoffs as well.
Yeah, exactly. Take a bit of convincing.
Well, that's it for this week. We're back with another podcast next Thursday, and of course for the next 2 Saturdays there's no live rugby programme, but we will be bringing you Gala versus Selkirk and Peebles against Melrose on Friday night. Until next week, from Dale and me, bye for now.